if you're feeling real resistance to writing down that one thing or carving out time, I always like to ask people, what's the payoff of staying the same? Because there is a payoff. And sometimes that payoff can be, but I feel needed. I like being the go-to person because people call on me. That makes me feel important and validated. And that's the deeper inner work that I know we haven't gone too much into today, but that's the kind of work where we need to start excavating. What are some of the beliefs that are fueling this incessant need to produce? Because when you peel that away, oftentimes what you'll find is that there's a fear that in the absence of doing, who am I? And so sometimes that is the deeper, more uncomfortable, but extremely transformative work that comes from taking this seriously.
Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster. Today's episode, we are talking about understanding overcare with Teresa Vozza. Teresa is an award-winning leadership expert. She's a keynote speaker. She is the former Chief Human Resources Officer for a Fortune 500 company as well. So she's a very successful corporate career. And she's on a mission now to really help executive professionals eradicate burnout from their workforces and transform their leadership. So welcome, Teresa. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Kendall. It's so great to be here. I'm super excited.
I am really looking forward to our conversation today because I feel like it is kind of the flip side of what we normally talk about, which is everybody always talks about the burnout piece and what do you do once you get burnout. And this is a little bit about the flip side. So, Teresa, why don't you tell listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do and why they can be excited about today's episode?
Yeah, so a little bit about me, besides what the bio introduced. So I've spent 20 plus years as a very high achieving corporate woman, climbed the ladder, did the corporate thing. And I wish that I had the knowledge that I'm hopefully going to impart with some of your viewers today about what being enmeshed in your work looks like, about what overcare looks like, and how to understand the signs of overcare and to make sure that we are veering ourselves back into a state of more balanced care where we can be most effective and most successful. And truly, I started my business after a significant burnout in 2015, which was a direct result of being overly enmeshed with my career and caring too much because I thought it was all under the guise of, well, if I care too much, it shows that, I really care about what it is I want to solve or the problem I want to solve. And I really missed out on the toll it took to my physical, mental, and emotional health. And I see executive women and business women, encounter this every day where they are overworking and they care so much about being successful and for good reason. But when do we cross that line and it becomes too much and it actually works against us? So that's something I'm really passionate about because I believe in sustainable leadership, whether or not you're a corporate executive or you're an entrepreneur. If it's not fun and if it doesn't feel good at least 80% of the time, then we really need to take a look within. So I work with women at that high achieving corporate level primarily, but some entrepreneurs as well, in trying to uncover what that, I don't want to say balance, because I don't think it's about balance, but uncover what that line is where they are caring too much and it's actually hindering their progress.
I'm really excited for this topic. I think there's going to be so many cool things that we uncover throughout this because I feel like I see this all the time as well when working with high achievers, especially, that influences our communication, right? Sometimes when we care too much, that can degrade our communication skills. And so I'm really looking forward to kind of jumping into this with you. So to start off for listeners, how do you define overcare? What does overcare look like? And what is it in terms and context of the workplace?
Yeah, so the best way for me to describe overcare is to describe it by how you feel. So there's often a very fine line between feeling like you care just enough, which is what I would call balanced care, and overcare. And you can distinguish the two between how you feel. Because when you are more even and when you're more balanced, you have boundaries in place. So it allows you to kind of flex through stressful situations at work, have options available to you, and stay resilient under pressure. And that helps us remain open to finding solutions to problems that we encounter every day. But when you're looking at overcare, this is when we are suffering from performance anxiety, or we are overly perfectionistic and we're waiting for the perfect product or the perfect launch or the perfect anything. And it often comes with a worry, anxiety, in my case, like rapid heart palpitations, mental preoccupation, rumination. And you know it because of the way you feel. You feel drained by the amount of time that you're spending on any one topic. And it starts to crowd out everything else that means something to you or that you care about. So you know it by the way you feel. If it's all you're thinking about, 24/7, then likely you've, crossed that line into overcare because you're starting to see the signs in your body as well. Tenseness, anxiety, worry, rumination. For me, that's always like a really clenched face and real intensity. So it's really just learning to understand, when am I starting to feel dysregulated in the body is your first sign that you may be veering too far on one side.
I think that you're honing in on the way you feel aspect, because I would argue that there's also different thresholds based on the individual for what
Mm-hmm.
overcare could look like and how that manifests, right? And this
Yeah.
is thing I've talked about with other professionals on this channel as well. Is I'm a high performer. I have a very high tolerance for how many priorities I can hold at one time, for how much scope I can manage at one time, for how many hours I can work, for where my mental bandwidth can go. I talk a lot about mental load, all the things you're storing in your brain that you're not working
Mm-hmm.
on. I have a very
Mm-hmm.
high tolerance for those things. And so I would assume that it would take a lot more for me to get into
Yeah.
overcare than others.
Yeah.
But I think that it's so important to really hone in on how do you feel, because especially for high performers who have that high tolerance, it's very easy, as you mentioned, to kind of tip over that line and to go from
Yeah.
I'm managing everything and I'm fine to like, this has become my entire life. This has consumed
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about like, where do you see that differing as well, right? I see it with time management a lot. I see it with
Mm-hmm.
priority management a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
where do people kind of tip over that line without realizing it?
Yeah, and Kendall, look, I can so relate. I mean, I was, and I still am that woman too, who can just take on so much. But I'll never forget something that a physician had actually shared with me when I experienced a burnout that was very silent and insidious. By the way, it wasn't like I had all these major symptoms. It was more of a slow and silent creeping up. And he said to me, Teresa, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that really resonated with me because, quite honestly, I saw it as a badge of honor. And I think a lot of high achieving women do. It's like, look at me. I'm a taskmaster. I can do so many things. And society rewards you for it. I was rewarded with promotions. I was rewarded with pay raises. I was rewarded in many different ways. And so it's easy to just want to keep going for those things. And even though I had the capacity to take on more, and I did, what I failed to realize is that I was not really focusing on how I would restore my energy.
Huge thank you to today's sponsor for our episode, Symposia Academia. They assist individuals to get into cybersecurity, and you do not need a degree or any prior work experience. They'll help you land a GRC analyst position in cybersecurity with their 4-step process, which includes training, an internship, interview preparation, and then on-the-job support. In order to get started, go ahead and head over to the link www.symposia.com/channel-partner/KB-3. You can also find this link down in the show notes, but again, it is symposia.com/channel-partner/KB-3 and check them out.
And so how that would show up is, when we talk about resilience a lot, I think when I think about resilience and the ability to use my executive functioning, my ability to think and to create solutions and to be on top of my game was impacted by the amount and the volume of things that I could technically do in one day. But I started to feel a sense of apathy towards the end, that I wasn't really as into the game or into the solution that I was proposing, because I was, quite honestly, just my tank was at an all-time high, but I wasn't able to recognize that that's what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that for those high achievers that are listening, and I know many likely do to your podcast, Kendall, is, just watch for the signs of, when you are pushing past that point and the decisions you're making are probably not the ones you would normally make if you were rested and you were nourished and you spent time in nature and you journaled and you wrote, and all the things that we know go into proper self-care. I think we're leaving something on the table when we don't actually build in rest and rejuvenation and reflection into our high achiever mindset.
Absolutely. And there's two things that you touched on that I want to spend just a little more time on. So the first is, just because you can doesn't mean you should, and how that starts to affect your daily, like, cognitive abilities almost.
Yeah.
And for me personally, one of the big signs is communication. I'm very short-tempered. I've talked about this before on my podcast. I am like I want it done now, I want it done my way kind of person. I have learned this about myself through years of self-development and awareness.
Yeah.
And I find myself being short with coworkers when my plate is full. When I have too much on my plate, that's when I start to just do it. Or I even was telling my husband the other day, when dealing with a difficult stakeholder, and you're like, is this not your job? That is not an appropriate thing to say at work. But sometimes I find, for me, when my load is too large, my communication suffers first. And so I think for listeners who are tuning in, figuring out what are those places where you devolve the fastest when your load is too high. Is it decision making? Is it prioritization? Is it time and boundaries? Is it communication? Like, where do you start to struggle? Because when you can identify that, it's much easier for you to realize that. And I think the second thing is, so much of our identity is wrapped up in titles.
Yeah.
And you talked about high performing women. We wear that as a badge of honor. And high performing men as well. I've worked with so many people on branding exercises, and the number of people who come to me and say, I want to be known as the person who just gets stuff done. That's a great reputation to have in the corporate workplace. It can take you really far, but it's also a very slippery slope. Yeah. Because when you're the person who can just get stuff done, your plate gets full and full and full. And it's a curse of competency. And so being able to separate yourself from that identity that you find yourself in is such a challenge. And so how do you help women and men? How do you help them pull back from yes, but I'm good at this, into what's best for you?
I know. There's so much of what you said that I was just wanting to reach across the screen and be like, yes, I know, I get it. But what I will share is that, one thing I'll add is that even though I had an ability to take on so much, and I was known too as the go-to person, as are many of my clients and probably some of yours as well, is that what suffered was relationships. And what suffered is relational conversations. So you're right. You gave a great example about it coming up in the form of being short with people, but it also comes up in our lack of attention. And, I always attention is the biggest compliment you can provide someone, is giving them your undivided depth of attention. And that was the first to go for me when I was operating at that full tank and, going all the time. So that's another thing I would add there that I think is important. To answer your question around, how do you start to unwind from the identity that you have as being the go-to person and being highly valued, is to start asking yourself a different question. Like, what do you want more of in your life? What do you want to actively cultivate more of that you may not even have the presence of mind to think about because you are spinning so many different things at any one time. So many of my clients, because they are the go-to person and they're relied on and they're completing RFPs and doing mergers and acquisitions and onboarding new executives all at one time, they've forgotten to check in, but wait a second here. Am I actually feeling more fulfilled or less fulfilled in other aspects of my life? Because it's quite easy to become desensitized and almost disassociate from other parts of your life when you are so habituated to being on the go. Mm-hmm. And it's only when you're still, even for like a hot second, which is I often say to my clients, just for one hot second, can we just pause and just be? And you will be amazed at what happens. Some of my clients are like, I don't even know how to do that. I'm afraid that if I stop, I will, have to contend with, other things that are happening in my life, whether that be relational or otherwise. So I think we can't discount the fact that the danger of being over involved in your career is that you're missing out in other parts of your life that could be giving you a lot of joy or a lot of meaning. So taking the time to cultivate what else means more to me or what else means something to me, and then what might I need to stop doing in order to make room for that, will start to create, I think, a more whole person based response to career and into work.
Teresa, everything you're sharing, I feel like even if there's not a single listener who tunes in and loves this, I needed this today. Like for me, this is healing and coaching. And so I'm sure it's going to resonate with so many people because I am that person. I always will tell people I will go until I can't go anymore.
I know.
But the second I sit to do nothing, then I am like a literal potato. There is no getting me going again. Like the day is done. Kendall she has put on like the day is over. And especially because so many of us wear so many different hats, right? We are caretakers, we are spouses, we are partners, we are parents, we are leaders, we are executives, we are in the corporate world, we have hobbies, hopefully also on top of all of this, that I think we, especially in, US, Canada, North America, especially, this is kind of pervasive in our culture. Everything is scheduled almost to a T, and we have all these things to go do. And it can be overwhelming and it can burn people out, and it can put us in a state that's not conducive for the best version of us. So if someone's listening to this like me and feels, yes, I'm resonating, I'm with it, what are some tactical things they can do to kind of start to pull back from that? You said to kind of sit for a hot second. I know on your socials you've talked about, heart-focused breathing and some of these things. Why don't you talk us through some of those ways start to take a step back?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in being pragmatic and having this actually work for you and not be some just theoretical conversation. And so I always ask people, including myself, to start to remember that breath is your best friend. So yes, I do talk a lot about heart-centered breathing, but it's not just heart-centered breathing. It's really just more about knowing that breath is your access point to your parasympathetic system, the part of your nervous system that can become regulated and gives you access to better thinking and slowing down and so on and so forth. So I always try to make it really easy. If meditation's not your thing and outdoors is, then go outdoors. And whether it's going for a walk and listening to an inspirational podcast or like this one, let's just say, or, or anything to the effect that just starts to make you feel softened and slowed down. I'm very visual and really am somatic. So I always think of what's going to have your shoulders drop. What's going to create that expansion in your chest? Is it sitting by the water? Is it going for a hike? Is it, any one of those things? Maybe for someone it's meditation. So just start to bring in one small 5-minute aspect of that into your day. And I think breath is obviously a great access point to that, because when you stop and slow, you can start to say, hey, maybe I'll go for a walk. The other thing too, though, is start to really pay attention. Start to really pay attention and audit just what does your days look like? So start to pay attention. Like, I'm a big fan of morning routines. I know some people aren't, and I am, but like, what do your mornings look like? What are your firsts? Like, whether it's 5 a.m. or 10 a.m., but what are your firsts? What is the first thing you attend to the minute you wake up? Is it your phone? Or is it a book? Is it a journal? Is it a cup of coffee? So pay attention to your firsts and what is one potential way of bringing in a first that is more nourishing. So for example, maybe bringing in a journal. If you don't like to journal, maybe it's having a cup of coffee on a porch. But just start to incorporate firsts. And my third, and I'll just end it here, is that sometimes I think it's easier for people to focus on what they need to stop doing before they can focus on what they need to start doing. So when you do that scan of how you spend your days, ask yourself, like, what is one thing that I can realistically just stop doing? And maybe it's social media after 9 o'clock. Maybe it is starting to wake up a little bit earlier so I have some time to go for a walk with the dog, or, go for a walk in general. But just, what can you stop doing that's going to create a little bit more bandwidth, a little bit more space for restoration? And for a lot of high achieving women, that word, restoration, that alone can be like, oh God, what does that look like? Like, I'm just someone that just go, type A, go. I mean, that's very much myself too. But I am a much more peaceful, calm, and joyful type A when I build in that restorative practice. And it can be super micro, super small.
These are great tactical tips. And I know that people who listen to my podcast, I have a big focus on like, how do we tactically apply this in our lives, right? And I say this to clients all the time and to people who work with me. And like, I am that person that you don't want to deal with if I have not worked out.
Yeah.
I'm just being nice. Working out and coffee. My quiet first cup of coffee in the morning and my time at the gym, that is my reset, my recalibration. It's where I get my energy out. It's where I get back to neutral. And I think it's so great what you're calling out, which is, for me, I know that when I overdo my schedule and I don't have time to go to the gym, I'm not my best self. I don't have that decompressed time. I don't have quiet time. I don't get to listen to my podcast, because that's what I do when I work out, is mental development at the same time I do physical development. And this focus on what do you decrease so that what you need can increase, right? That pendulum is you only have limited time. And I always tell people say, what's your biggest constraint in your business and your work and your life and your success? For me, it's time. There's only so much we can do and stay balanced. And so for people who are listening, I think identifying those small areas of, hey, this isn't my best me. This isn't the best investment of my time. This isn't the best way that I can show up. Let me cut things out to make space for the things that want me to be that person. And I would go further just to say, moms who are listening, you too. I love my children. They are single greatest joy, maybe second greatest. I like my husband a lot too, but like, they're great joy of my life. Yeah. But moms especially, like, hey, I log off work to go spend time with my kids, is still not finding enough time for you. Like, there has to be time that is yours. And so I love this concept of like, where do we make cuts so that we can spend time effectively?
Yeah, I love that you brought up moms too. I'm a mom of 2 kids as well, and a husband and a dog and the whole thing. And I think carving out time is the answer. It's just because you will never have, like, when people say I don't have time, that's going to be the truth for all of us. But carve out sacred time, whether it be, again, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, and find your thing. Like when you're saying be super practical, if there's one thing I say to my clients is, right now, as you're listening to this, take out a piece of paper. Like literally as you're listening to this, take out a piece of paper. Look at how you spend your time, just roughly, just scan your week and say, what is one thing, just one thing that I can stop doing today that I will give me back an extra 20, 30 minutes, maybe even 10, 15, that I can reallocate somewhere else. Maybe for some people it is with their children. Maybe for other people it's in nature, doing something restorative like moving their body. But it's as simple as that, just one thing. I'm very big about being simple and just starting with one. Don't overwhelm your nervous system. Start with one, stick with one, iterate. How do you feel? Okay, great. Then let's see what else do you got? And we move through it that way. But before long, you will have carved out something sacred just for you that will help insulate you from over involvement in your career or overcare.
You talk also about balanced care, right? Almost
Yeah.
being like the mirror component to overcare.
Yeah.
And you talk about this really helping you change, right? And we've given tactical examples of this, of like cutting things out, of reassigning your time towards activities that fill your cup, right? It's a very popular like social media meme, like you can't pour from an empty cup, but it is true, right? And
True.
so you talk a lot about that, but you also have a real clarity that finding balance does not mean you're tapping out. You're removing yourself from work. So I'd love to hear more about how for people who think of themselves in their identity as a high performer who takes on a lot, who delivers a lot, how mentally do we reframe this so it doesn't feel like we're pulling back or giving up, but instead helps us be more?
Yeah, I think that's so important because I think that balanced care is not about removing yourself from finding a solution to a problem or doing something at work that's important. It is ensuring that we don't cross over into that maladaptive side where we start to worry or obsess about a result. So when I think of balanced care is very renewing because what's happening is you are actually being very intentional about creating time and space in your mind and in your schedule to create more supportive or to access more supportive actions or do things that are more renewing. So I think that when it comes to being more balanced, you'll know the difference because you'll have the capacity, the cognitive capacity to, breathe and access your intuition and say, okay, what does this problem need from me right now? What do I need to give it in terms of time, attention, money, resources, whatever it might be? And you'll have more access to solutions because you're not going at a problem from a state of depletion. So I think it's really important to understand that overcare is synonymous with depletion, whereas balanced care is synonymous with more renewal. You're coming up with solutions, but you also have the ability to wisely discern between when enough is enough. I'm done for the day. I've come up with a few solutions. Now I'm going to step back and let it percolate and make sure that this actually fits.
It's interesting when you were talking about kind of like the maladaptive stage. I'm going to give a funny example from personal history, that when I was in active labor with my daughter, my firstborn, active labor, I was texting people at work because we had a big launch of a tech product I had been working on. And so I'm in the hospital, in a bed, in a gown with a doctor, having a chat, texting my lead, like, hey, how's it going? Have we gotten any feedback yet? Is the response positive? Like, what do you need from me?
Yeah.
And my boss at the time was a wonderful, wonderful human being. And he called me and he was like, if I see one more person texting you, I'm firing them. That's where we're at. Have a child, enjoy your maternity leave. I'll see you in 6 months. Stop.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to know, how's it going? And you're right. Like in hindsight, I look back on that and I'm like, I cannot believe that doctor must have been like, should she be having a child? Because you're just so wrapped up in it. You become obsessive and you become like hyper focused and fixated, right? So I think it's so great to kind of balance that with a renewal mindset of that. Hey, I have this time I can take away. I have this disconnection. I think what I would encourage people who are hearing this, who think like, oh, this is great. I can't do it though. I'm too busy, because I get that a lot. I can't do it. I'm too busy. Start with carving out one thing you don't have to do anymore. I loved your tip, Teresa, on like, just write that down. But second, are you even asking for the resources you need? I think the flip side of this that I see a lot in executives and leaders is we know that the company is doing layoffs or they're struggling to hire or they're cutting costs or they're doing whatever. And so we don't even say, hey, I need
Hmm.
people, I need more time, I need assistant to help
Hmm.
with this. We just say, oh, I'll just shoulder that burden. So I would also
Yeah.
encourage you, where can you free up time by getting resources that you need in your role to be successful so that you
Hmm.
can find this balance longer term? That's going to be better for the company
Yeah.
anyways. And
Yeah.
it's save.
Yeah. I love that you said that. And, like I always use the example of like hiring a cleaning lady. It's why did it take so long for me to hire a cleaning lady? So it's like, resources can come in the form of like actual resources at work, but resources at home too. There's absolutely no shame in it. And I just want to say one thing that I just feel really compelled from my heart to share it, is that there's no shame here when it comes to the topic of falling into overcare or workaholism or any of those types of things that come natural to high achievers, because it is a habit. Like, it is a habit that is reinforced by society. It's reinforced by our upbringing and all the shaping forces that have come at us. And one of the things I would suggest to your listeners or anyone listening to this is that if you're feeling real resistance to writing down that one thing or carving out time, I always like to ask people, what's the payoff of staying the same? Because there is a payoff. And sometimes that payoff can be, but I feel needed. I like being the go-to person because people call on me. That makes me feel important and validated. And that's the deeper inner work that I know we haven't gone too much into today, but that's the kind of work where we need to start excavating. What are some of the beliefs that are fueling this incessant need to produce? Because when you peel that away, oftentimes what you'll find is that there's a fear that in the absence of doing, who am I? And so sometimes that is the deeper, more uncomfortable, but extremely transformative work that comes from taking this seriously.
I love it. And normally at the end of an episode, I will ask, what is a parting word for our listener? But I feel like you just nailed it. The parting words for you guys is try to take these small steps. And if you feel
Yeah.
resistant to those small steps, what is that deeper meaning? What is that deeper reason why we feel that like attachment to overcare, right? And
Yeah.
how do you address that? So I think, Teresa, this was amazing. We could talk for hours on this topic. I
Yeah.
can tell you and I have a very similar flow of energy. I love it. Um,
Yeah.
but why don't you tell listeners where they can find you if they heard this and they said, I need coaching on this, I need help, I need to find balance. Where can they go to really connect with you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you, Kendall. It's been so great to be on here today and to meet with you. And I too felt just an instant energy. So I'm super excited. And the best way for your listeners to get a hold of me is likely just my website. So teresavozza.ca or teresavozza.com. And I hang out a lot on LinkedIn. I do a lot of thought leadership and a lot of writing through LinkedIn. I'm also on the gram, so you can find me there too. And I'd love to hear from you.
Well, awesome. Well, we will tag all of those resources below so that you guys can go find Teresa after this call. But as always, if you like today's episode, please rate it 5 stars. Leave your comments or your questions about overcare and balance care below so that Teresa and I can get back to you guys. And we appreciate you tuning in for another episode.